Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Well, it was a Saturday, but we still had court. It was a lot less well attended. I'm here at the Delphi murders trial, several hundred miles from home, and I'm watching it in person. Richard Allen is on trial for murdering 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German. According to the prosecution, he slit their throats, killed them when they were doing nothing other than being out for a walk in a park on an unseasonably warm February day in 2017. Now, the case has been very much sealed. It has not been something that's been public in the way that we often expect trials to be. It's not televised. It's been somewhat difficult to even obtain documents that were filed. And we aren't getting copies of the exhibits. Even the media is not allowed to publish or photograph copies of the exhibits, even during trial. We aren't getting audio from the trial. So the only way to pull this information is to actually be here. So that's why I'm here, boots on the ground, so I can give you the information. So I got there insanely early again, but it wasn't as necessary today. There were fewer people today, and it wasn't quite the rush that it was. I think because it was Saturday and it was a half day. Now, the judge referred to activities for the jurors that they had planned. So I don't know what that would be about. Maybe they're going to take them to a movie or something. It certainly is difficult. The jurors have been sequestered for an entire month away from their families. They're not even in their hometown. They're in a hotel a good ways away from where they all live, which is in and around Fort Wayne, Indiana. So welcome, everybody. It's good to have everybody in the chat. I did not write down my first 5 in advance, so let's go up and see who was in that first 5. There we go. Olivia's mom. Honestly, I think there's a direct link between YouTube and Australia. Olivia's mom, night after night, she is number one, I would say, 4 out of 5 times. Olivia's mom, aka Sue. Good to see you. Hammy, Heather J, Sal, and Tennis Girl 101. Special shout out to you, the first 5 in the chat. Awesome to have you. So we went to about noon today, and for those who are super interested in what Richard Allen was wearing, and I get questions about that, he was wearing another plaid dress shirt and looked very neat and presentable. Today, unlike in the past, the mic was actually turned to the witness, and there was even a comment from the prosecution about, hey, make sure that mic, speak directly into the mic. So I hope they're hearing us, and we really want to be able to hear the testimony. And it's hard, even if you're in the courtroom. So we got some really important information today, information that I have been trying desperately to find online. I wanted to know exactly where the bodies of Abby and Libby were found. Where in this scheme of things were the bodies found? And we finally got an answer to that. We actually heard from the person who discovered the bodies. And so they used a map and they pointed to where things are. Now, we aren't allowed to have a copy of that map, so I made you one to look at, and I will do that tonight. I'll show you sort of where things were and what they walked us through during the trial. Now, I'm going to be beefing this out and adding some more things, but for tonight, we'll at least be able to see the basics of what they were telling us about where the bodies were and about how things laid out together, where the clothes were found for Libby and Abby, and where then the bodies were found. We also learned a lot about how the bodies were discovered, how they found first the clothes, then across the creek they found the bodies, and we learned a lot more about that. So I want to start with something that we've been trying to do for a while now. I've given up on the screen share. I think it's not working because of the way I'm having to broadcast from a hotel room. It's a little bit different, but I wanted to show you what I've been talking about while I can add it to the stage. Yay. I did this in a different way so we could see them today. So, okay, this is the 2 sketches of the person that is referred to as Bridge Guy. And it's even difficult to explain that. The first sketch, Bridge Guy, is a composite sketch that was made based on the video and based on witness testimony. And that was what was initially put out. Now, when I say the video, Libby took a video of a man walking toward them on a bridge. So based on that, and more particularly on witness testimony, but the defense anyway suggested on both, that there was a composite sketch of a person made so that the public could look for the person who actually committed the crime. And that person could at least theoretically look more like Richard Allen. Then years later, they put out this second sketch that had been made based on another witness. And this was, now they told the public, the person everybody should be looking for, and that's the younger person. In my view, they look nothing alike, although at the testimony at the 3-day hearing earlier this year in the summer, there was testimony apparently from one of the troopers or lieutenants that these were exactly the same person. I don't see it. They look really different to me, but one clearly younger, one older, one with facial hair, one without. They just don't look at all the same to me. And they even have a different sort of facial structure. So over time, there were actually 4 sketches that were made or from different witnesses. And to me, each and every one of them looks really different. The number 3, I can see potentially being like number 1, since the bottom half of the face was covered. It's obviously a lot vaguer, but you can see these look really different to me. And those were made by different witnesses. They could have been different people walking through the park, or they could have been exactly the same person. And that's what law enforcement initially was at least suggesting. Law enforcement never released to the public 3 and 4 as go look for this guy. Here's the guy you want. Instead, they were focused on 1 and then on 2. And when they announced 2, that image, they said, stop looking for 1. We want you to look for 2. So that all of that was a bit confusing. Now, I wanted to add to the stage, and first I'll show you this. These are some courtroom sketches that were made by Jeanette Jaquish during this trial. And you can see they're just simple things she made during the court proceedings, but I thought they were really cool. And it's absolutely the only way to bring you anything visual from the courtroom. And I thought it was really neat what she was doing. And she gave me permission to use it. She has a Facebook called Chewing the Facts that talks a lot about the Richard Allen case. So please go over and give her some love. I really appreciate her letting me use this. You can see her sketch to the left is Baldwin Auger. I don't think there's an I in that. Auger is one of the attorneys, the female attorney on the defense side, and Rosie. Those are the 3 attorneys for Richard Allen, and you see him sitting down. Then you see more of a close-up of him, obviously very, very simplified in terms of the lines. The biggest thing I want you to see from this that I thought she really captured is he has a very square head, and it's very it's rounded and smooth in every direction, not just because his haircut is cut short, but that's sort of just the way he looks. So let's go back then and compare this to the 2 sketches we were given, and particularly focused on number 4. You see how number 2 has a strong and pointed jaw? Richard Allen doesn't have anything like that at all. If he were to look like anything, it would be more like number 1. Right now, particularly without the hair, either facial hair or hair on his head, he doesn't really look like number 1. But it's also true that I think his head is just squarer. Obviously, a composite sketch is not an exact replica. It's not an exact depiction of anybody. It's the best that could be done when you compare what a witness has said and you run it through a sketch artist and then you bring out a rendering. It's not going to be exactly the same. And in fact, the judge has excluded all sketches from the trial. Now, what the defense wanted to do was leave out number 1, which is definitely the one that looks closest to Richard Allen, and to only put in number 2. The state said no sketches at all. They're all hearsay. The state said you're taking a picture that was made based on a witness interview, and it was made by somebody else, and you're putting that in. Instead, you should have the witness come in and say, well, this is what he looked like. And the jury can draw its own conclusions about what that person would have looked like. Now, that's a reverse argument. Often the state is pushing to get the sketches in, but in this case, they wanted them out and the judge ruled with them. So none of the sketches are going to come in, but I thought it was interesting because we were initially told, the public was, to look for these people. And so I thought it was especially interesting to compare it to Jeanette's drawing. So thank you again to Jeanette for letting me show that to you. Now, I want to get into today's testimony, which was really interesting. And for the first time, I could see on the map where things were. I thought that was really important and critical. We heard from several witnesses who were there that night and the next day when the bodies were discovered. And we learned a lot about what happened. So let's hop into that. I want to say, please like and subscribe. I would appreciate that. Lyra Ward is a new member, and am I going to be able to say that? Agapixo. I'm not sure if I got that right, but welcome. I'm glad you're a new member. And so is Skeptic Curiosity. Great to have all of you. Oh, Kirsty, thank you so much contributing to the hand warmer fund. I'm so grateful. All right. So it is freezing cold waiting out in the morning for the court to open. They even opened a half hour late today. So that was brutal. We all thought we'd reached the time, and then we're all standing up holding our stuff, eagerly waiting to enter the warm courthouse. And they were like, no, we're not going to open till 8:30. Like, bummer. All right. So let's start with Steve Mullen, an investigator, and I'm going to read these to you. And he's an investigator for Carroll County. And back in 2017, he was the chief of police in Delphi, have been doing that since April of 2014, so about 3 years. He was off shift, but heard on radio traffic about the two missing girls. And the girls had entered at the Mears entrance to the park. And I'll add that later. I don't have that on tonight's maps, but we will look at a lot of where these things are. So he actually went in, even though he was off duty, he went in to try to assist dispatch in helping and figuring out how they could find these two girls. He also reached out, he said, to school officials to see if maybe some of the girls' friends had heard from them or maybe knew where they were. So he said he was at the dispatch the entire day, and all the way up until the search was ended the next morning at 2 a.m. on February 14th. That 2 a.m. time is really critical for several reasons to the defense. The defense says that at 2 a.m., when they stopped the search, and they didn't start it again until 6 a.m., that someone brought Libby and Abby's bodies back and put them where they were found. That up until then, the girls had been taken elsewhere off site. They weren't in the park where they had been left to take their walk that day. The reason they didn't show up was because they'd been taken somewhere else. And whether they were murdered at the scene or at that somewhere else, that part isn't really clear. But the defense is saying that they were not at that scene. That fits a few facts. For example, the fact that Libby's phone went on and at 4:33 in the morning and suddenly received a bunch of messages, that it had not been in contact for that whole period of time. And you'll see one of the jurors asked a question related to that. So we'll talk about that when we get to it. So now the witness said that at 7:30 a.m., he got back into the office to the station, and the girls were still missing. This is the 14th of February in 2017. So he met with the volunteers, got everybody organized and ready to go. And the searchers at this point were predominantly looking downstream. And I don't know if let me add to the stage. Now, this is the part where I'm going to need my glasses. I have to take these on and off. All right, let's see. Okay. This is an overview picture of the area where the Monon High Bridge is. We've heard all about how the girls were crossing the Monon High Bridge. There's a picture of Bridge Guy, a man on the bridge coming toward the girls. And we haven't heard the whole video yet, but there's a 4-second clip in which a voice tells them, guys, down the hill. And whether it's coming from bridge guy or from somebody else. We aren't totally sure, but we do see a man in that little 4-second clip. We're going to see more at some point during the trial. We expect to. So the Monon High Bridge, as you can see, is very long. It actually it spans a creek 60 feet above the creek. So it starts substantially before the water and ends substantially after the water in order to span that sort of depth. The cemetery that you see is where a lot of the personnel were stationed and so forth, and is where the person who ultimately found the bodies entered through there, went through a gate at the bottom of that, and then found the bodies down below the cemetery and away from the creek. The girl's clothing was found, or some pieces of it were found on the other side of the creek. And that, of course, is one of the facts that is hotly in dispute, is why were the pieces of clothing found on the other side. So looking at that, you can see I wonder, I don't know, I wonder if you can see my cursor. I don't know. Let me know if you can. So the creek flows from the right side of your screen to the left side of the screen. It's kind of all through the middle, very curvy. It's called the Deer Creek. It curves up and then around and up and around, and it flows under the Monon High Bridge. So remember that it goes from right to left. And I'll go ahead and pull that out. So they were searching mostly downstream. I'll add it again, which means that they were looking around the Monon High Bridge, but they were looking in the area where the bodies were not. They were looking downstream, in other words, to the left of the Monon High Bridge and just slightly to the right of it. And we learned a little bit later about why they probably did that. So I'll get to that in just a minute. So the searchers at 12:15, and this was super important because we had wanted an exact time, Pat Brown called and said he had found the bodies. And Pat Brown also testified today. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Said that he had found the bodies. And at 2:00 approximately, this witness, Steve Mullen, met with Steve Mullen, met with the families of the victims. He had a chaplain with him to explain that the bodies had been located. That means the bodies were located a bit before this was fully communicated. There's a gap of time there. And we really wanted to know, when were they found? That was something important. So at approximately 7 p.m., they got a phone call letting them know that the Hoosier Harvest Store, which I'll add to the map at some point, had security cameras. They got that footage right away, and it had some important information about timing because it showed cars going back and forth in front of the Hoosier Harvest Store. And that was something that was going to contribute to them coming up with a timeline and figuring out who did what. Then on February 13th of 2024, and that means the exact anniversary of the disappearance of Abby and Libby, their bodies were found the next day on the 14th, but it was this year that they did drone footage that went all the way from, we'll add this, from Freedom Bridge, which you may be able to see in small white letters to the left of the picture. It went all the way from there to the Monon High Bridge and showed that whole expanse and gave the jury an idea of what exactly it looked like. What would it be like to be there? Now, I can't show you that because the exhibits are not being made available to the public. So I can't show you that, but the drone, how long it took became an issue. And we'll talk about that in just a second. All along the bridge, there are decks, and there is there are little juts out of wood. And then there is, for currently in that drone footage, the jury saw something that was different from what was actually there when the girls were abducted and then murdered. At the time they were abducted and murdered, the entire span across the creek 60 feet above the creek was a rickety old railroad trestle with no arms, nothing on the side to prevent you from falling off, missing rotted boards all the way around. It was crazy looking. I can't believe anybody walked on this, but they kept asking the question, who would typically walk on this in 2017? They asked witness after witness this. I couldn't really figure out why it was important to them. If you know, would you put that in the chat? Because I have really been wondering about that. But they said, typically it'd be teenagers and younger people. I should think so, because it looked absolutely crazy. There is no way I would do it. Currently, there has been a restructuring of this bridge. Partway across, he explained it was about 100 to 150 feet of it are built out right now. And it's nice. It's maybe Trex or some kind of non-rotting board. It's got arms on the side, railings, so that you feel more secure as you're walking across the creek. But it stops. And then there's a space, and then you get to the trestle again, the old trestle, the one with the woods and the wood and the missing boards and the rotting. And that was actually there when Libby and Abby were walking across it that February day, and when the guy walked toward them on the bridge. So that's more like what it used to look like. And it's partway been refurbished, and they're going to be, I think, one day doing it all the way across, and they're going to be making it a nice crossing bridge. It'll be way safer than the old version. I hear that people crawl over, which is insanity to me. They crawl over to the other one. I mean, there's a gap. I can't believe anybody would do that. That is not something I will be bringing to you. So we will not be covering that. Okay, so the search, as I said, was called off at 2 a.m. and Baldwin, in cross-examination, he's one of the attorneys for Richard Allen, said, so that was before 4:33 a.m. The reason that time is important is because that's when Libby German's phone went back on, downloaded 15 messages, and then was off again. The defense argued in opening statements that means human hands handled that phone. That's the only way it could have been. So one of the things they noted was that there's a lot less foot traffic on the bridge these days than there was in 2017, probably because of that gap between the new part and the old part. And so there's a lot of growth over the bridge that was not there at the time. So remember, the bridge is very long. It doesn't just cover the creek. It also goes into the woods because it's trying to span such a deep ravine of 60 feet down to the creek. So and as it goes through the woods, there's a lot of overgrowth on it. And you could see that in the drone video. So there were many and interesting juror questions today. In this case, the jury is allowed to ask questions and to find out answers to their questions from a witness. A lot of times when a juror asks questions, it's related to information that the judge has ruled out and has said, I'm not going to allow this to come in at trial. And it's sort of a frustrating experience. The juror asks this question and the judge just says, no, I'm not going to let the witness answer it. So it doesn't really feel good it doesn't make you feel like the jurors are getting their questions answered. But here the questions have been extremely practical, and there have been answers to every single one. Not one has been objected to or has there been a refusal to answer. The first question was, what was the thought process when looking downstream? Because the girls, of course, ultimately were found upstream. So why did they look downstream? What were you thinking? The juror asked. And Steve Mullen said, well, we were thinking that maybe they had fallen off the bridge. In other words, they might have been washed down a ways. Maybe that is what had happened. So that was the thinking about it. Then the jurors also asked, could you please provide clarity on where the bodies were found? Now, this was a super important and interesting point. So important that some of the people there today, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Laura, who bought me breakfast and was just so helpful, unbelievably great. And Hidden True Crime was sitting next to us, Lauren, as well as two of her friends, taking amazing notes, really great notes. And we were all sharing and trying to confer, because if there were times when you could not understand something or you didn't get it. So we put all our notes together and we think we have pretty much a good description of what this was. And it was very interesting. So the question was, what could you please provide clarity on where the bodies were found? Was it along Deer Creek or the creek reservoir that runs north to south from Morning Heights Cemetery? And we both had the exact same reaction, which was, I don't remember the fact that there was a creek reservoir running north south from Morning Heights Cemetery coming in. I don't remember that those words being said, and neither of us did. So immediately my thought was, how does he know those facts? Has he been doing some juror independent research, which obviously the jury shouldn't do, and which, but it may well have come in through a witness. As I have said several times, it's been difficult to hear. So it just may be that we didn't hear that, but it was so specific. It was so exactly specific. And it was interesting because I didn't remember hearing those words. And the witness said, I'm not familiar with creek reservoir. Like, what are you talking about? What is a creek reservoir? And it said that what they were talking about, and they finally determined, was a ditch or ravine, an erosion area that runs down below the cemetery. And I'm going to add a different picture for you here, a little bit more of a close-up. So what you see right there at the top, the Morning Heights Cemetery is at the top. You can see that in red. And the ditch ravine is along, I drew a line to just kind of give you an idea, but picture it running from the cemetery down for a ways toward the creek below, toward Deer Creek. The bodies, as you can see, were found on one side of the ditch ravine. My guess as to why people maybe didn't go in the area where the bodies were found is crossing this ditch ravine isn't really possible, and maybe they didn't walk up or down. So maybe it was kind of a natural barrier and people stopped there and didn't look. Now, the defense, I think, would disagree. The defense would say there were people searching there, and they've been working on trying to find someone who will testify that there were lights in that exact area. And we are hearing hints that there were lights over there at night when people were searching. I don't know that we've gotten to the person who said in this exact area. Why does that matter? It's because the defense says those bodies were moved. The defense thinks that Libby and Abby were not there that night, that people searched there. And the reason they searched all over and never found the bodies on the night of the 13th is because Libby and Abby were not there. Libby and Abby were actually somewhere else, and their bodies were brought back sometime while the search was called off between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. They would probably say it's around the time that Libby's phone turned back on. It was found underneath Abby's body there, about where the X is. So it's important to notice that the bodies are found not right by the creek, apparently in kind of a flattish area, and not flat. They called it more like flat-like, flat-ish, that kind of thing. But they are not right by the water. So that's what I can tell you about it. And we'll talk a little bit more about this map in just a minute, but let me head back into the testimony. So that was the creek reservoir, and it could, I will add this back in anyway. All right, so one of the witnesses had talked about the Weber home, and you see the Monon High Bridge there. Where the Monon High Bridge terminates, a road, a little, I think it's even dirt road, goes underneath it. It may be paved. I'm not sure about that part. Goes underneath it. And one of the defense theories has been that when the girls were ordered down the hill, there was a waiting car. They were taken by car somewhere else where, who knows, but they may have been killed there, or they may have been killed at the scene. But either way, they were somewhere else. Libby's phone was off, and then Libby's phone was turned on briefly at the scene where the bodies were left and staged. They believe they were staged. We are not going to be hearing a lot about that because they aren't allowed to talk in this case about their theory that the staging was done in a religious way by Odinists, that it was done to look like runes that would have symbolic significance. So But one of the things that was a focus of the testimony and cross-examination today was whether or not the bodies could have been seen from where some of the searchers were the night before. And one of the issues, and I think I got this right, it's a little hard, and I may get some people to check. Maybe Laura will check this for me, but I think I put the Weber home in the correct place, and I think I put the Logan home in the correct place. The property where the bodies were found actually belonged to Ron Logan. I guess then his property must run way back, all the way back there and along the creek. And the Weber home is across the creek. So law enforcement was at the Weber home that night. They were looking around. They did not go in the outbuildings there on the property at the Weber property. And there's been some hint from the defense that maybe they think Weber was involved. There was reference to the fact he had a gun of the same type where the casing was found between the two girls. So, but one of the points that's been made is that where the bodies were could not be seen from the Weber home or from anywhere on that side of the creek. There just wasn't visibility for that. That's one of the points the prosecution has tried to make. So we got another juror question that was really interesting, and we all agreed back there, comparing our notes and trying to run through this, we all agreed that we did not think there was a good, solid answer on this because we thought it was pretty confusing, and we didn't feel like the jury will know exactly what the answer is. Somebody asked, was the drone going at average walking pace? The drone shot took a while. They took us through it. It clearly was faster than I could walk. I can tell you that for sure. There is no way I could walk that fast if that was an average walking pace. And the jury was, I think, trying to get a sense of how long it took to walk things. They honestly seemed to be asking some questions that related to whether or not they believed Libby German's father. That's what it seemed like to me, that they were asking some questions around his testimony. And he said he didn't go here and he went here. I don't know why they would have. I thought that was extremely interesting. That's just my impression. I didn't run that past anybody. It was just my thought. But the drone, they said they aimed for it to be going at about the pace that someone would walk, and that the video we saw in court was at double speed to just try to get it through faster. So there was a question, would it take 9 minutes to walk from Freedom Trail to the end of High Bridge? And remember, well, I didn't even show you Freedom Trail, maybe. We'll have to add that. Freedom Trail is all the way back. Do you see the purple icon to the left there? It says Freedom Bridge, Delphi, Indiana. Even back, you'll see a green icon with a guy, one of the park symbols, and it says Monon High Bridge Trail. And that is where the trail, that is one entrance to the trail. That's not the entrance the girls used that day, but it is one entrance to the trail. And you would cross near, I don't know if you cross on or near the Freedom Bridge, but then you cross across the highway there, and then into the park area and toward the Monon High Bridge. The girls came in, and I'll add this definitely in the future, but you see where the words Monon High Bridge are? Right above that, you'll see some roads and small rectangle of roads. That's the Mears Farm. And right across from that is where there's an entrance called the Mears Entrance to the trails. And that's where the girls were dropped off that day. So very near the Monon High Bridge, and they went to the Monon High Bridge and crossed it. And we know that based on the picture of Abby on the bridge. So the question was, they wanted to know how long it would take. And so the question was, would it take 9 minutes to walk from Freedom Trail, that's where you see the green icon, all the way over, they didn't say all the way, I said that, to the end of High Bridge, Monon High Bridge. And he said yes. And the witness said yes. And the defense was really skeptical of that, like, what? And there's no way. I mean, we saw what happened. Here's how I interpreted what he said, although he did say yes to that. He said it was hard to guess, and the original footage that they took was 20 minutes. So we round robin that, and there were lots of different interpretations of what exactly had been said. Here's how I interpreted it. I think that the original footage was 20 minutes. That was roughly supposed to be how long it would take someone to walk it. They sped it up, and it was 10 minutes. But I don't think it would take 9 minutes. I think it would take longer than that to walk from that far entrance all the way to the Monon High Bridge. So the next witness was Jacob Johns. He's a lifelong Delphi resident, and his wife worked with Becky Patty, who testified yesterday and who was the grandmother of Libby. Now, I have lots of people to thank, so let me not get behind on that and say thank you so much. Cherie, welcome. She's a new member. And Gypsy Soul is adding to my hand warmer fund. Thank you. I need a very large hand warmer fund, so I'm very grateful for that. And I'm glad to have eyes on it. It's a very interesting case, and I think it's so important. I really do believe that trials should be public and that it's a protection for all of us as well as for the defendant. Thank you, Purple Puddles. I appreciate it. And Zoe B, thank you also. And I am really, it's an honor to be able to bring you information from the inside of the courtroom. So thank you all. And DB Bentley, thank you so much. A very generous super sticker. I so appreciate it. And we've got some more new members, Zoe B and Larissa. So we've got some more people I'll have to thank, but let's go ahead and head back into Jake John's testimony, Jacob Johns. So he worked at Pearson's, a propane company, and they went in, he and another work colleague, Shane Haygood, went into work, and the boss asked him, would they help with the search? It is the 14th. He had learned the day before that Abby and Libby were missing. He heard that from his wife. So he goes into work the next day, and it's such a small and close-knit community that the boss says, hey, instead of working, why don't you go out and help? Let's see if we can help them find these two girls. And so at 8 a.m., they were looking near the bridge. The main thing they were looking for was the tie-dye shirt that Libby was wearing. They knew that for sure because they had gotten that information from Libby's family, and because it would be easy to spot, being colorful and dramatic. So they stayed on the bottom side. Let's pull our map back in. I think I'll go with the bigger map. Okay, so you see the creek curving through the middle there. I may do a lighter version of this to kind of bring this out for you next time, but it's darker and it runs in a snake fashion roughly through the middle, maybe slightly lower than the middle. And that's Deer Creek. So they were looking on the south side of that, not the north side where the bodies were found. And they continued under the Monon High Bridge, and he and his friend Shane found the clothing in the water. They found the tie-dyed shirt caught on roots in the water, and they found black Nike shoes. And I've tried to put an approximation. It was funny too, because they would start to show something and the attorney would stand right in the way. You'd be like, no, I really want to see where they're pointing. But from between us, I feel pretty good that that's where he was pointing, that it was pretty much directly in line with the Morning Heights Cemetery and directly below that, and that the bodies were in a line toward the cemetery. That's where I concluded it was. So Shane tried going across the creek there. So having seen the clothes, he tried to cross the creek, but it was deep at that time. And so the witness said, well, we only had real short boots, so that really wasn't an option. But a fireman came up and tried to contact people to say, hey, we found some clothes here. This is an important place. And nobody was responding. So the fireman headed across the creek right there, and then did get hold of dispatch and said, we found a shirt, we found black Nikes. And at the time, the witness said, I didn't see anyone searching in that area across the creek from where I was. And so the witness is down below, based on topography, the Weber home, but in the area where the drive is to the Weber home. And the witness is on the south side of the creek when the clothes are found. So there was, let's see. All right. There was approximately a 10 to 15-foot hill from Weber Drive, which I think, and it seems crazy that something that is just a pathway to somebody's house would be called, it looks like N625W, like it's named like a highway, but that's what it looked like to me. I think that's about where the path was to the Weber home. And there's a 10 to 15-foot hill going downward, a drop from Weber Drive, which I think is what you see there, the little white path that wiggles across toward the Weber home, there was that hill down to the creek. The fireman started contacting people to come from other sides, from the other side, since they were having trouble getting over there. He said, bring some people from the north toward us so that we can connect these places. We're on the south side. We see clothes. We don't see anybody. So look on the north side. Maybe they went into the water, he's thinking. So at some point, Brad German and his wife and Kelsey showed up as the fireman was going over there, and he knew the Germans. Now, I was not clear if he was saying he was on the south side and so were the Germans. I wasn't completely clear about why they showed up at that exact point or where they were. He said he'd lived his whole life in Delphi and he'd never known about the trails. I thought that was fascinating. He'd never heard about this. And he heard then Pat Brown, who came from the other side, say, "We found the bodies," and he sounded alarmed. He could not see Pat Brown or the bodies. That was a super important and hotly contested point. Could you see from where the clothes were across to the bodies? That would make it more likely that the night before, when they were looking in the area around the Weber home, that maybe they could have spotted the bodies of Libby and Abby. And if they could have done that, then, or if somebody could have found those bodies and they weren't there, that would suggest the bodies left and then were brought back. But he said he could not see Pat Brown or the bodies. And the reason is really related to whether or not they were there that night before or whether they were brought back to the scene and it was staged, which is the defense belief. Now, this was, as far as I know, brand new information. I don't think this had been out before. I know I had not heard it. There was, from this witness, a 2019 statement that said he could see shoe prints, and we had to round robin this. It took all of us writing this together, but here is what we got. We think he said this. He could see shoe prints and slide marks, and the ground and rocks had been disturbed near the access road going to the creek. But he said, but I want you to know that statement wasn't mine. It was by a friend of mine. But that's what he saw. Now, that was really interesting because it would suggest that if it was there the night before, law enforcement didn't see it. But these shoe prints and slide marks leading down toward the clothing would suggest that's the course, that's the path that Libby and Abby took as they were moved across the creek to the place where their bodies were found. And he said he could hear Pat Brown pretty well. Sound was traveling, but he couldn't see others coming to the area. He could hear them, but he never could see them, I guess because of the underbrush and the slope and the terrain and the way sort of the ground was. So we next heard from Pat Brown, probably the most moving testimony of the day. And he lives in Delphi, always has. He said he had known Mike Patty, the step-grandfather of Libby, since high school. His daughter is the same age as Kelsey, the older sister of Libby. So on the 13th, Becky Patty posted on Facebook that the girls were missing. She's the grandmother of Libby, and Libby lived with her. And Pat Brown called his buddy Mike, who was at that time at the police station, and said, "Hey, I'd be glad to come help." It was dark about that point, so Pat Brown called another buddy, Tommy Mears, of the family where the Mears entrance is that the girls went in, called Tommy to meet him there. And they went to the cemetery and stopped at Ron Logan's house, which I showed you on the map. And then he talked about the ravine that runs through the cemetery. So I'm just approximating where it is. It may go back into the cemetery itself. They could see lights down as they walked along the ravine and worked their way to the bridge. So they, as near as I can tell, I want the large one. Nope, I want the small one. Okay. So they went down through the cemetery, and I think they walked toward the left there on the left side of the ditch ravine. I don't know exactly where it is. It's somewhere below that cemetery, maybe even inside the cemetery. So they walked, they were on the 13th, they were above it, but he suggested they were on the left side of this map, not the right side where the bodies were. So they were on the left side of the ravine. Now, that's another important point because, of course, the defense is trying to place people in the spot where the bodies were, and they don't have a firm answer on that yet. There were people in and around and near, but so far they don't have anybody exactly in that spot. They don't have to have that, but I think they would like to have that just so they can say that the bodies weren't there. Otherwise, the people searching the night before would have found them. So I told you that. They walked to the west of the ravine along the ridge. It was really steep in one spot, and you can't walk right by the water, he said. The way the land is and how steep it is, you can't really go all the way to the water. It's just too steep for that. So they went all the way to the high bridge, the Monon High Bridge, and then backwards on the trail, and came home for the night. Then the 14th, he even called off work to help with the search. I thought that was really neat. He felt that strongly about his friendship and wanted to help. And Shane Haygood asked him to look across the creek. Remember, Shane was with the other witness finding the clothes down on the south side, and Shane asked him to look across on the other side, to come from the north side down toward the clothing so that there can be people coming from two directions. And he ran about this point into Melissa Marchand, who was Libby's aunt, I think, or maybe she was the sister of Becky. I'm changing it and going with the sister of Becky, the grandmother of Libby. And he said and then he found the bodies. I'll go ahead and pull this out. He actually found the bodies. At this point, he was crying and extremely emotional. He said, I said, we found them. And he started crying so much. I mean, he had to put his hand on a table nearby to steady himself. I mean, he was not able to stand for just a minute. He was so grief-stricken with what he remembered about finding the bodies. He said at first he thought they were mannequins, and he could not believe those were real girls, and that Melissa apparently saw this and ran back toward the cemetery, and he yelled out, "We found him." And there were 3 girls, they weren't identified, who came up about this time, and they didn't get particularly close, but what it sounded to me like, I'll put the close-up back in, it sounded to me like the 3 girls were coming from the side where the ditch ravine was. They may have been just below it, but they were coming from the side of the Monon High Bridge. But he said they didn't get really close. It was right about that point where the bodies had been found, and they didn't get anywhere near the bodies. The fireman was in the creek, and he walked down toward the creek and met the fireman there. And so, but the spot where the bodies were was flat-ish. They said it wasn't flat, but flatter than the area around it. He said he could not see Shane Haygood, who was on the other side, giving him directions he could hear, but he couldn't see him. And he could also hear people on the bridge. Now, that plays into another point the defense has made, which is if Libby and Abby are in the middle of a crowded park, and there were clearly other people there, and there are 2 of them, and they're being abducted by one guy, 5'5", why do they not scream? Especially as one watches the other be killed. Wouldn't they scream? Wouldn't they yell? And then people would have heard. Why didn't people hear what was going on? And that plays into the defense theory that the girls weren't killed in the park, that they were either killed somewhere else or killed in the middle of the night when no one was around and the search had been called off, but that they were not killed in the afternoon when Richard Allen was present in the park. So he said the witness said that he remained 5 to 10 feet from the bodies and that he did not have a firearm. Now, why, of course, is that important? And the answer is because of the bullet that was found between the two girls. So this is Pat Brown, and the bullet that was found between the two girls, it wasn't a bullet, it was an unspent casing. Law enforcement says they believe that traces back and connects and matches with a casing with a gun that they found when they searched Richard Allen's home. This was found between the two bodies. That's somewhat confusing to me because I thought the bodies were one on top of the other. And it was found in the ground, according to what we heard during jury selection, or may have been the mini opening statement from the defense. It was found a couple of inches down into the ground. So we haven't heard from the prosecution on that, and we haven't heard a witness say, I found the bullet. So we don't know a lot about exactly what happened there, but that's what I heard during, I guess it was mini opening probably. So at this point, he's saying, I didn't have a gun, so he can't be the source. And one of the things the prosecution would like to do is eliminate people who could have dropped that unspent casing at the scene other than Richard Allen. And since law enforcement also uses rounds of that same .40 caliber, the defense is going to argue that somebody else dropped it at the scene. At least that's what I think they're setting up, that maybe a law enforcement officer dropped it at the scene, but it won't be Pat Brown because he said he did not have a firearm at the scene. He said he could see lights from the cemetery to down near the bridge. So there was visibility. So statements that people saw lights across the creek would make sense and be credible. The girls were located 30 to 40 yards down to the creek. You can see the creek from where the girls were located. He did say that older guys would find the slope down to the creek more difficult. So I think that was on cross. I think that was the defense positioning for this would have been really hard for Richard Allen to have done. He was older than maybe that second sketch, which the jury won't see, but maybe the younger guy is the one who actually did this. He said he encountered a few police as he walked to the cemetery. The way it was actually phrased by the defense was, and you encountered lots of police as you walked to the cemetery. He said, well, a few. I was guessing the reason that they were asking that, the defense was pushing for that, was because they were trying to suggest that there were more people who could have dropped that unspent round at the scene, that the scene was possibly contaminated by the large number of people who were there tromping in and about. There was a really unusual question by Attorney Baldwin for the defense. He asked, and are there feral animals and coyotes in that area? I don't know where that came from. And the objection from the prosecution was that's outside the scope of the direct examination. So you aren't allowed to ask it. It's not in the category of things I asked about, and it was sustained by the judge. So we didn't find out. I don't know why it would have mattered. They did not ask anything at all about what the scene was like where the bodies were found. I thought that was so important. I'm guessing maybe they weren't allowed to ask that because everything related to the third-party culprit and Odinism was left out. But to me, that seemed like simply a fact that should have been communicated to the jury. What did he see? He was a witness. What was visible to him when he arrived at the scene? He said he saw two bodies and they looked like mannequins. We know from, at least we expect based on the Franks memo, that branches were on top of the girls. To me, that's an incredibly important fact, even if it is only to suggest from the prosecution that Richard Allen tried to cover up the bodies. But we got nothing about that at all. He described nothing about what he had. He said they looked like mannequins at first. That's it. We didn't learn one was here, one was there. I saw their heads. I could only see their feet. We didn't, they have branches, nothing. We didn't learn anything about what he saw. And I thought that was I thought it was a missed opportunity for the truth. I don't know whether it was a missed opportunity for the prosecution or the defense, but I just felt like it was important and we should have been told that. So I was disappointed that we did not get that information. We had 3 very super interesting questions from the jury. The first one, especially great. Who was your phone provider in 2017? What a perceptive question, I thought. The answer was Verizon. And so somebody, either the defense or the prosecution, whoever it helps, is going to be scrambling to find out who Libby's provider was. Maybe they mentioned it. I didn't write it down. At least I don't remember writing it down. Their point. If Libby was if Libby's phone suddenly popped on at 4 something in the morning, but was out of range or something, didn't get any messages, maybe it had to do with the provider. And this witness talked about making phone calls. So did Shane Haygood. They talked Shane Haygood made a call and they were talking back and forth. They were right down in this area and they were able to use their phones. So this witness, his phone was Verizon. And so that was what was Libby's? I don't know, but I thought it was a really good point because it would be an answer to where she was, whether she could have used her phone and whether or not the phone had to be manually turned on, as the defense suggests, at 4:33 in order for those 15 messages to download. Another question, approximately how long did it take police to get to the bodies after you called them? And the witness said, well, it seemed like forever, but it was about 5 minutes probably. I don't know why that was super important. If you have an idea, put that in the chat. But that was something they wanted to know about. And jury question, how fast was the crime scene secured after you called? So they obviously seem to be worried about contamination of the crime scene, whichever juror was asking about this. I don't know. I have not really heard much argument about that. I don't know if they're specifically asking because they want to know about that unspent casing and whether or not that could have come from another person. But that also could have come from law enforcement there. It doesn't have to be an unsecured scene for that to be the case. But those were oddly specific and very interesting questions from the juror. So that was our day. And we got so much information today. It was a really fantastic day. So what I want to do is thank a few people and then move into the chat and let's answer some questions and talk some more about what we learned today and some of the facts. If you want to get more into the maps, we can do that. And so let me thank a few people. Well, I was on GB Bentley. Okay, here we go. Lady Jane, thank you for your super sticker. I appreciate that. And Carazola X says that Alan has made an enemy of correctional officers and inmates, and that is concerned about his safety within prison. So this is, I really feel like from what we've heard that it has less to do with Alan making an enemy than with the position in which he was placed. I mean, he was in solitary confinement. I don't know what exactly he would have done to create the enmity, but I'm not sure that we really know about that yet. We're going to have to learn more about that. I've been wondering, based on the fact that in the opening statement, instead of saying he confessed 61 times, which is what we heard at the hearing that happened this summer. Instead, we heard he confessed several times. I thought that could be a way of lowering expectations so as to meet higher when the jury hears them, or it could be that they don't plan to bring the inmates. So I'll be really curious about that. But I share your concern, Carazola, about the safety. That is certainly always an issue. And Emily, thank you so much. I appreciate the hotel fund. Thank you very much. Random Pie, super sticker. Thank you, Random Pie. I appreciate that. Crystal also in with the hand warmer fund and just now a member. Thank you. I'm so glad you're a member. And speaking of, tomorrow night we're going to be doing, I'm going to probably do a brief live, and I'm going to do a recap kind of the week and some of the highlights of the week. So I'll be going live tomorrow night to do that. And after that, we are going to have a members only event. We're just going to be talking about what it's been like. You can ask me questions about how it's gone, what are some of the inside stories that have happened and things like that. So tomorrow night after the live stream, we'll be doing a members only event where we just chat about some of the things that have been happening. So please definitely members, put that on your calendar for tomorrow night. Inigo Montoya, if someone brought them back to the location, would that mean the perp was likely in the search party? They would want to know that the search was called off for the night. Wow, that's a really interesting point. That is a fascinating point. I haven't heard anybody make it, but I think you have a great point. Could be. It also could be perhaps they had access to a police scanner. They might have known that it was called off for that as well. Hannibal, thank you so much. And a member for 8 months. That is hard to do. We've only had members for about 8 months. So thank you so much, Hannibal, from being in from the beginning. And Wonder Woman, thank you. I do love law. I just love law cases. And thanks for your comment and for your super chat. Okay, I'm going to back up a little bit to the questions because I bet there were a bunch put in before I got that. All right. Yes. Oh, I did forget to say, please put question marks at the beginning because it's hard to spot them in the chat, and that'll help a lot. Why didn't law enforcement have the hair strands tested? Beth asked. Well, one thing we learned was that apparently it's only a single hair strand. And why on earth they did not have that tested, I cannot imagine. It seems to me like something they clearly should have done. I don't know why they wouldn't have done that. It definitely seems to me like they should have. And that's a point the defense has made as well. It doesn't seem like it's going to be something dramatic to help the defense, because what it seems like is that it's going to be the hair is going to be somebody, a female, related to Libby. So probably just her sister whose shirt she had borrowed that day. So probably not going to be a dramatic moment for the defense, as if, say, it belonged to another man and would suggest that they were fighting right before she was killed. So that would be completely different. Tree asks, I thought Abby had Libby's shirt on, but didn't you say it was in the creek? Did I misunderstand? So the clothes were mixed up. We definitely know that, Tree, that Abby had Libby was not wearing clothes. Abby had clothes on that were not hers, but maybe not that shirt. She may have had a jacket on or pants or something that didn't belong to her, but it wasn't Libby's shirt, apparently, because they did find that as well as the Nikes. Gaming and sleuthing. Oh, that's so nice. Would stand in line for me. Oh my gosh, that would be amazing. That would be absolutely wonderful. Yes, I would definitely like to sleep in. I was there at 4 this morning again, and I am pretty worn out. I took a 2-hour nap. It was awesome. I haven't done that in years. I have no idea when the last time I took a nap was, but wow, it was great. So that would be wonderful, gaming and sleuthing. If we can figure out how to do that, that would be great. April asking me, do we know if Libby and Abby walk the area often? I asked because at 13, I did a walk with friends, but there was always an alternative reason, like meeting up with a crush. Indeed, one of the defense thoughts as well. Could they maybe willingly got in a car with somebody? There are so many things related to that theory, but that's not going to be presented to the jury. But yes, they did not regularly go to this park, and they had been at least once before. Libby had gone across the bridge with her sister. Her sister said she crawled. It was so terrifying, but Libby just walked across. But Abby had never been there before, and Libby had not walked it again other than that one time. At least that was the suggestion from her sister. It wasn't something she regularly normally did. It was just something they wanted to do on this day off from school. And that was why they went to it, but not a regular thing. Now, we know that Kagan Klein was in contact with Libby German on the day that this happened. And it says I'm getting a low battery. How low? 10. Okay. Well, we'll finish up. We've got time. Okay. So we know that Kagan Klein was in contact with her. Could they have arranged to meet up by some format like Snapchat where the message disappeared? That's just not known. Obviously, law enforcement does not believe that. The prosecution does not believe that. The defense might, but they're not going to be allowed to present that to the jury because all third-party culprit evidence has been ruled out by the judge in the case. So they're not allowed to point the fingers to any of the other parties they say might have been involved in this. Willie Taylor asked, does this judge seem biased? So I think that I don't think it's helpful to answer that question right now. We can talk about that later. I think some of the rulings have been mistaken. Specifically, I think the ruling about the third-party culprits, and I've said it before, I do think that's a mistake, greatly increasing the chances that the case gets reversed and has to be tried a second time, which is in no one's best interest. Idaho Charlie wants to know, did I look at the exhibits that media were allowed to see? No, because I was excluded from the definition of media. So I am not allowed to look at the exhibits that media are allowed to see, and they aren't allowed to photograph or use them. So it isn't all that useful. There was apparently a Snapchat photo. Libby was sitting in the front seat of her sister's car as they rode to the bridge with Abby in the back. And she took a picture of herself, Abby directly behind her, and posted it on Snapchat. And I would have been very, very interested to have seen that, but I couldn't see it from where I was in the courtroom. The way it was displayed, I couldn't see it, and I wasn't allowed to see it in the court. So, who confesses 61 times, then pleads not guilty? Well, it would be somebody who had already pled not guilty and then confessed 61 times and then again said they were not guilty. Richard Allen's belief is, and this is for Kay's question, Richard Allen's belief is that his team argues he was kept in conditions, his mental status so deteriorated that he confessed for that reason. He denied being involved beforehand, deteriorated, confessed, and then as soon as he was able to, his mental health restored, he again began denying that he had done that. Okay, so let's see who else. I am on Wonder Woman. Oh, you were 2 sessions over. Joe Schmo says, yes. Hi, Joe Schmo. Yes, you were 2 seats over. Good to have you on, and appreciate your saying hello. Melanie Wolf, thank you for the super sticker. And Joe Schmo has been a member for 2 months. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. All right, let's see. Denise Pelton, are you doing something fun tonight? I'm going to eat a real meal. I'm really looking forward to that. That is going to be really awesome. After all of this, do I think that Richard Allen will have a lawsuit? John Phillips asks. No, probably not. I think that the lawsuit, I assume, would relate to the way he was treated in prison and the fact that he was put in solitary confinement for substantially longer than the 30 days that's recommended. He was in solitary confinement for 4 solid months, and that caused the mental breakdown and the mental deterioration. But I think those lawsuits are very difficult, very hard to bring. So I would doubt seriously that will happen. And if he should, by a miracle, be acquitted, I don't think he's going to be turning back. I think he's going to be looking the other way and moving far, far away. Dunn Laura, my understanding is that Libby was close in height and weight to Richard Allen. Did that come up? No one has talked about her height or weight yet that I recall. I don't think anybody's mentioned that. S. Cipher, if Odinists did do this, is there any connection to the girls being near a cemetery? Well, I think the suggestion is maybe yes. There was also some bizarre statements from Kagan Klein during one interview about how he was in the cemetery and his dad went into the area where the girls' bodies were found and returned to the car with bloody clothing. And just bizarre. I don't know if he just made it up or if it's true. But anyway, the jury will hear nothing about that. Can you explain about the police sketches? So maybe we can go into detail another night about where each of the sketches came from. They came from different witnesses. So I don't have all that stuff laid out for right now, so I could tell you where all 4 came from. But that's a good question, Allie. And we should probably put that. I should probably put that on the list to talk about. Willie Taylor asking about the judge being biased. So no pictures were shown of the scene to the jury. Oh, no, they were. They were shown that. Of the scene. No. The man who found them didn't give a description of the scene. And how did he know for sure without getting close that they were gone? He didn't say, okay, so there are a bunch of things. Aga Pixo is asking this question. It's a good question. Let me break that down a little bit. No pictures of the actual scene of the bodies were shown to the jury. And I think that would be because they could have shown pictures and said, is this what the scene looked like at the time? He would have said yes, thus identifying the photograph, and they would have authenticating the photograph, and he would have, then the prosecutor would have shown them to the jury. That didn't happen, and I'm assuming because instead they're going to put those in through the people who actually were at the scene taking the photographs, the law enforcement who showed up shortly thereafter. And they didn't put them in through this witness, but I'm sure the jury will be shown that. Now, how did he know for sure without getting close that they were gone? I don't think he ever said exactly how close he got to the bodies. He talked about the 5 to 10 feet. Was that how far he was? And maybe it's because they looked like mannequins and weren't moving and had sticks lying on top of them. But he gave us no real explanation for that. I remember that 5 to 10 feet. Somebody may remember what I say. He did say something about being 5 to 10 feet. Maybe that's how far away he stayed. I think that's what I said. He said he stayed away 5 to 10 feet. So I think, how did he know they were dead? I just think it had to have been the appearance and what he was seeing, which was not described. All right, let's see. Yeah, I mean, I do think very strongly, people asking about the fair trial, I feel very strongly that he needs to be able to present his defense about the third-party culprits. I think that's so important. I think he also needs to be able to present his geofencing data, which it appears is going to be kept out. Do you think they called off the search that night? Tabitha Veers asked. Yes, they even testified that they did from roughly 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. They called off the search and they put it aside. Can you get Uber Eats delivery while camped at the courthouse? Yes, I imagine you could. I imagine you could get that. It's really early, though. You have to find a place that's open at 5 in the morning or 7 in the morning, whatever it is. I'm very hopeful that, this will die down in terms of the large numbers that we're going. I think it will get later as it goes on. Mannequins are posed. Perhaps that is why that description was used. True. And I think of mannequins as being sort of just that color, where it's kind of a colorless look. And I wondered if that had something to do with it as well. All right. Thank you. Please do hit the like button. I would really appreciate that. And that will help us get out to more people. So thank you. And if you're not subscribed, we would love to have you. Please do. Looking for some more questions. Did Kelsey say she was out for lunch with her boyfriend in downtown Delphi after dropping them off? So when did she work? I found Kelsey's testimony very hard to hear, and I can't answer your question. I know that she said something about going to her boyfriend's, and I'm not sure if she went out for lunch or if she just was at his house, but for some reason she wasn't able to pick Libby up. Libby and Abby were going to be picked up by another family member, and because she was busy, maybe she went to see her boyfriend and then went straight from there to work. I'm not sure. Chloe's mom says, even if it's a female hair, who says a female wasn't involved? Well, that's true. Although apparently then it would have to be not only a female, but a female related to Libby. So that would certainly be, that's going to be a difficult case for the defense to make. I think that Libby's sister or mother killed or grandmother killed her. I think that'd be a super hard case to make, but I do not know. And that's obviously a piece of evidence that should have been known long ago. So that is a shame. How does someone become a member? CC asks. Well, that is such a great question. If you are on an iPhone, you probably have to go onto your computer. But if you go down where it says Lawyer Lee, there should be, and if you're on your computer or an Android, then next to Lawyer Lee, it should say join now or join. There's a button that says join and you hit that and that's how you become a member. Now, if you are on your iPhone, you need to get a computer and go on because it doesn't work on the iPhone. And have I argued, thought about that? Yes, I have, but I've not yet won on that. Other channels have that. I don't know why we don't. April Osteen asking, regardless of where they were unalived, someone turned on the phone at 4 and 4:33. I agree with Inigo. Suspect that ended at 2 and bodies dropped off within 4 hours. Why was the search called off? Yeah, but it was a little strange that they called it off at 2. I mean, it had been dark for a very long time by then. So 2 a.m. was sort of late to call off the search. I guess I just thought, we've had no luck. We've searched everywhere we could think of. We didn't find anybody. Let's try again in the morning when we can see better and everybody's a little rested. So as far as I guess that's why. I guess that's why they did it. But we haven't had a lot of information about why they called it off at 2, what their thinking was at that time. And they may well have thought that the girls were off somewhere, that they had, gone to run away briefly, or maybe gone to see a boyfriend or something like that, and that they would turn up. Maybe they were thinking that. But I think obviously the family was very concerned, and you can see by the turnout of the community that so was the rest of the community. WB, did they have any excuse for rejecting the FBI help? So I think the defense would say absolutely not. The decision to go in on their own and to not continue to work with the FBI was what the defense called a turf war and should never have happened. They were quite clear on that. And several people saying they think it could have been a female killer. That's possible. I guess my thought is one if it's one person, then one person managed to kill two people. And and physically, it wasn't just, from a distance shooting, anything like that. Physically cut them and do it while one isn't screaming and the other one is being killed. It does seem like one person, that's a tough sell, but that is definitely something that is being argued. So, KB, I'm confused on the third party defense ruling since the testimony today has brought up some of the potential third party suspects. Does that open the door for the defense to talk about them now? KB, I definitely see your point. There's more to it, though, to arguing it than just some references to the person. There has to be a connection. And the judge has ruled that those various third party culprits, there hasn't been enough of a connection established between that person and the crime. That's what she's ruled. So they are going to make a proffer, and it's, I guess, possible the judge could change her mind, but I think it's unbelievably unlikely. She's already ruled and said it's not coming in. So I think that's the way it will likely stay. How is the jury reacting to the state and or defense? Susan Moore asked me. And that's always a great question. So far, I think they are just absorbed in the case. 100% interested, looking hard, leaning forward, wanting to know more. Every one of them. And I don't see any difference in the way they react to the prosecution or the defense. They haven't really gotten into some of the issues. I think they just really want to know. And they really want to learn about the case, and they're just soaking all of that in. I feel like they're doing an impressive job, and they are facing a daunting task of a month away from family and everything else. So we have tons of new members. I'm so glad. We have JD and Cheryl and GMA Marty and Leslie Perry. Welcome, one and all. Stut Joe, have I had a glass of wine or strong drink yet? I have not. Stut Joe may be thinking I need to do that. Okay, Megan. Thank you. Oh, if you lived in Delphi, you would stand in line for me. Well, thank you. And yes, that will buy me a warm dinner probably tonight. Thank you so much, Megan. I appreciate that very much. Oh, and Megan is also gifted 10 lawyerly memberships. So you have to turn on the ability to receive memberships and to receive gifted memberships from YouTube. So Mama Pinks will put in the chat, or Marlon, how exactly one does that. We have our moderators, Marlon and Mama Pinks, who are just awesome. I'm so grateful for all the time they put into the channel. And Marlon today was helping me make sure the technology is working before I went live tonight. So we are all grateful for that. All right, I'm looking. Brian F. I know it's super early, but can you tell who the jury seems more receptive to? I cannot. I don't see any read on that. I see them just eager sponges wanting to learn everything that's being told them and wanting to dig deep and know the truth, wanting all the facts. They don't want to miss anything. I really respect that. That's impressive. Shelley's Flowers, didn't one of them chat with an unknown guy? I don't know about that. I don't know anything about that. I have not heard that. Are you talking about a juror? I've heard nothing on that. Woman of Steel, they're not going to ask about Anthony's shots. I don't know. They're not going to ask about Anthony's shots, I don't think. If there was communication last minute, maybe. How am I doing on my phone? Whew, we're down to 6. Okay, so maybe a couple more questions. Was there a chain of custody for the items recovered from the creek? Not yet. We haven't seen them. There was a photograph of them, and the witness was asked, is this what you saw? So it was just an identification of what was seen. Dennis Smith, did the searchers try calling their cell phones to get a location of the ring, if any? I feel sure they did. Certainly the night before, because they talked about how they did call and they did text. Whether they did that on an ongoing basis, they did have AT&T pinging the phone. So they weren't getting any response to where it was located. And that is not how they found it either, how they found the bodies. Why lie? Is there a good chance if the defendant is found guilty that the whole thing can be overturned on appeal because of all the secrecy and inconsistencies so far? Why lie? I think the number one reason the case would get overturned is the keeping out of all the third party culprit evidence. That really is of concern to me. I feel like that matters, that he has a constitutional right to present that. I think he had strong enough facts that he could connect them at least as much as is necessary to argue it to the jury. The jury might well have rejected every last one of those theories. So we aren't buying that. That's ridiculous. The judge did, after all. The judge said there's no connection. I think the jury should have been given the chance to make that decision for itself about whether it believed they were not connected. So Lyndon is a new member. Welcome. And Liz M is a member for 8 months. That's great. And Gypsy Soul is a new member. That's fantastic. So glad to have so many new members. And I will be seeing you tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, I'll be going live, and I'll be going live. We're going to be doing kind of a breakdown of the first week of trial and what's happened. I'll be talking about some of the highlights, some of the things I think may have made the biggest difference so far for either side. And I'll be going into just kind of an overview of it like that. And afterwards, we are going to have a members only event. And I'm going to be talking a little bit on the background and the things that are happening here, what I'm seeing and observing in the courtroom, outside the courtroom as we stand in line, just what it's like to be here. I'll be answering your questions in kind of a smaller environment. So I'm looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow night. And I will see you soon.